What is up, guys? This is Pinzo back with another video today, and what I have for you guys is something that I've been asked to do a lot that I'm finally going to do. This is a solo lane tier list slash like matchups kind of guide. I'm not going to be necessarily walking you through the actual specifics of every matchup, but I will be going through, I'll be ranking every solo laner, and I will be telling you kind of what their good matchups are and what their bad matchups are. So we're going to jump right into this. This is, I don't know how long this is going to be. I'm going to try and make it as brief as possible, but we are going to hit every character that I think is good in the solo lane. So, starting us off, Countess. I think she is playable in the solo lane. I think she's really bad. I don't know when you would want to play this character. I think the only matchup that you would play this into would be like Seraph, maybe. But I think she's pretty bad. Don't play her in the solo lane, but I think she is technically viable, so I'm going to put her on. Crunch. Very few bad matchups. I think Crunch matches up really well against most tanks. So I think he's good into Severog. I think he's good into Greystone. After level 6, he beats most people in the solo lane. As far as bad matchups go, don't play Crunch into Richter. Don't play Crunch into Steel. You can play him into Steel. Steel's not really going to kill you, but you're just not going to be able to kill him. Those are really the only bad matchups for Crunch. I think he's an easy S tier. Fang Mau. Very situational. They nerfed Fang Mau passive 2 or 3 months ago, and since then he has fallen off the solo lane tier chart quite a bit. His passive makes him really good at trading early game, but it falls off very hard. It is not, as soon as people get defense online, this passive doesn't do much. So on the first 3-4 waves, you should be able to chunk down your opponents pretty hard. In that time period, so basically before level 6, he is good against Crunch. He is good against Greystone, but then after that level 6 point hits, he really just doesn't beat anybody. Like that's the main issue with this character. So if you are good at fighting early, if you want to get an early lead, Fang Mau can do that, but then you turn into a clear the wave and walk away, go try to gank mid, go steal jungle camps, that becomes your goal. So lots of bad matchups, but a couple of decent pre-level 6 matchups. Let's see. Greystone. I don't think Greystone is an S tier solo laner, to be completely honest. I do think he's A+. Lots of good matchups. Matches up well into Crunch, in my opinion. This is kind of a skill matchup into Crunch. If you're good at Greystone, you can outtrade him. You're going to get your ult forced a lot, so you do have to be able to play safe while your ult is down. But you can outbox this character. It's not that crazy. I really like Greystone into ZERGUS as well. I think Greystone's good into Severog. One of the better characters into Richter, in my opinion, as well. As far as bad matchups go, Grux is like a terrible matchup for Greystone. Steel's a pretty bad matchup for Greystone. So be careful when you see those characters. Grux, very similar to Greystone, in my opinion. A couple of really good matchups. Like, I like Grux into Crunch. I like Grux into Greystone. He's very good against Severog as well, but he has a couple of pretty bad matchups. Like, I think Grux into ZERGUS is really hard to play. I would call it a skill matchup. If you're just a better player, you're going to win, but I think a good ZERGUS player will beat a good Grux player the majority of the time. Really bad into Richter as well, not good into Steel. Again, okay into Severog. But this character just wins. He hard wins the matchups that he wins. So most of these other kind of brawlers, these fighters, Grux will beat. The hard tanks, Grux kind of doesn't beat very much. It's just really hard to 100 to 0 those characters. I'll honorable mention to Chimera. I think this character is really good into Richter solo. That's it. That's the only time you play this character is if the enemy solo laner is Richter. Chimera does destroy that guy. He does destroy Richter. That's the only time I would play him. Terrible matchup into basically anything else. Let's see. What else do we have? I'm not going to put Rampage on here. I think Rampage is terrible in the solo lane, like to the point where I'd rather have a Countess than a Rampage. Richter, a really sneaky character. I almost want to put him into A+, but I think I'm going to put him in A. A very sneaky solo laner. I think this character is actually very strong right now in the solo lane because your trades are so good. The passive shield that you get from Richter is so good at out-trading characters early. Characters like Fang Mau or ZERGUS who are trying to poke you. When you have a passive shield like that, the shield is so big, it's 15% of your HP. they just can't. Their poke doesn't do anything. It doesn't even break your shield. So I think Richter is a very sneaky solo laner. I think he's really good against some of these higher tiers, like Grux, like Crunch. I think he's really bad into tanks, into Steel or Richter, or Steel or Severog, excuse me. I think Richter is terrible. You do not scale into the late game as well as those other characters, and they are scaling for free because you're playing Richter, and you should never realistically be able to kill them. So it's kind of one of those things where Richter is kind of like Steel in the fact that he checks a lot of these aggressive solo laners, but is not very good into tanks. Sereth. I'm going to put Sereth on here because I think she's good. I'm going to put her in B tier. I don't think she's a top tier solo laner, but I do think Sereth is very, very playable in the offlane. And the reason for that is because she has immunity on her Q. I think she's really good against Fang Mau. I think she's really good against Steel, is her primary good matchup that I would play her into. Other than that, I do think she's playable into some of these other characters. Like, I think the Sereth and Greystone matchup is skill-based. I wouldn't play her into Grux. I wouldn't play her into Crunch. But, like, Sereth can check Greystone if you play it properly. I think she does have some of these good matchups in here. Again, she has a lot of bad matchups. But at the same time, I do think Sereth is very viable. Severog. I think very similar to Richter. This character is just, as long as you play until level 6 safely, and you don't die, basically, is all you need to do. You just need to not die. Then you will be fine, and then you scale on this character into late game, and you become an absolute menace. Once you get a bunch of stacks online, once you get into team fights, this character is really, really strong. His laning phase is weak. He's really bad into Crunch. I think this character still has a lot of viability in the solo lane just because of what he brings to the team in those late game team fights. I think that he's very strong late game, and he's pretty safe to scale on into most matchups. Like, outside of Crunch, almost, Severog is a free lane. So I do think he's still quite good. Steel. Steel is just broken. I'm going to be completely honest with you. He's not getting nerfed in this next patch. Also, side note, I'm doing this before the next patch because not very many solo laners got touched. Like, almost none of them did. So this is still going to ring true, in my opinion. This whole solo lane tier list will still be fine because most of these characters didn't get touched. Steel did not get touched in this next patch. Steel is absolutely bonkers. He checks almost every solo laner. Again, I think Steel, one of Steel's very, very few bad matchups is Sereth, who is not a very good solo laner. So, considering that, Steel destroys Crunch, Steel destroys Grux, Steel destroys Greystone. He beats Severog, Richter. This is kind of an even lane, but this character just checks every other solo laner that's out there, and it's pretty ridiculous. So, I do think Steel is very, very strong. I think he might even be, like, if I were to order this, I think Steel is probably the #1 solo laner. The other thing about this character is that he is so forgiving that it just, you have so much shielding, you have so much CC. Even if you manage to die a couple times in lane, this character is so good on just his base kit. You can be 2 levels down, and your kit is so good that you can just win fights with it. So I think this character is cracked. I think he's very forgiving, so even if you're a bad player, I think you can play Steel offlane and do it well. This character is kind of nuts. Shinbi. I think Shinbi's a pretty bad offlaner right now. I'm going to put her in the B tier. I think she's okay into characters like Greystone. She's okay into, like, Richter. I just don't think this character actually wins any matchups. She's so item dependent that you definitely don't win any matchups until your first item, maybe 2 items in certain matchups. And at that point in the game, your matchup in lane doesn't matter very much. So you end up just being this split pusher who's trying to 1v1 whoever comes to check you. You're trying to 1v1 them. And I think that playstyle is fine, but especially in solo queue, like in casual queue, I think that playstyle is really hard to pull off because you're hoping your team doesn't take 4v5s on the other side of the map, and they need to wait for you to have pressure in your side lane that you're split pushing so that someone comes to check you so your team can take a 4v4. That's what needs to happen, but again, in solo queue, that does not happen very much. If your team is playing it properly, I think this character is okay. Outside of that, I would say she's pretty bad. ZERGUS. This is an interesting one because ZERGUS has fallen. My opinion on ZERGUS has decreased in like the last 2 weeks. I thought this character was crazy, and now I think this character is okay. I'm gonna put him in A tier. I think this character is decent. He has some good matchups. He's good into Crunch pre-level 6. He's good into Grux. He's decent into Greystone. I think this character, my issue with this character is that if you cannot kill your lane opponents, if you cannot get a big enough lead to kill them, I think this character falls off late game really hard. I think this character is, in late game team fights, I think ZERGUS is almost unplayable in late game team fights. And that is why you see people who, especially at like the competitive level, are starting to experiment with Phoenix ZERGUS. Because the thing about this character is no matter how tanky you are, this character has no range. He doesn't do a lot. He has some mobility, but not a lot. This character is an ult bot, but you die every time you ult. You're going to die if you want to ult the enemy team and keep them there. However, while you are Phoenixed, if you die with Phoenix and you're respawning in that like 2 seconds that you're respawning, your ultimate cage will stay active. So people are experimenting with Phoenix on him. I think it makes him a little bit more viable because it makes your death is just going to happen. It is inevitable, and it makes it worth it. So I think that this character has some very niche capabilities. His laning phase is very good, but once you get to team fights, I think ZERGUS is just really bad. So that's my opinion. Let's see. How about fringe solo laners like KARI? I'd probably put KARI in B tier. I think I'd rather have a KARI than something like a Counce. She matches up really well pre-level 6 into most characters. Like outside of Steel, she matches up into all of these characters really good pre-level 6. And then if you get a lead, then she's good post 6. If you go into level 6 even with something like a Grux or a Greystone, it will still be hard for you to kill them. That's just the way it's going to be. But if you can kill them once before level 6, which like level 3, 4 KARI is insane, just by the way. If you deathmark someone, double dagger, and hit them with a Q and some autos, people kind of die to that. That's like 80% of someone's HP, even in the solo lane. So keep that in mind. You want to fight early. You don't want to fight on level 1 or 2, but level 3, 4, 5, you really want to fight. KARI is also getting buffed next patch. I think it will definitely, you will max the Q every game, I think. And in the solo lane, I think that's going to be a massive buff to her. So if you are good at playing aggressively, if you want to rotate and kill the mid laner a lot, KARI does do those things very well. Let's see. What else do we have in here? That's most of the actual solo laners. I will shout out to mage solo laners. The mages would be like Gideon and Gadget, maybe, would be the two that I'd put in C tier. They really don't have any good... Their only good matchup is Grux. They match up for, one reason or another. Gideon and Gadget both match up, even like Howitzer in this conversation, right? They match up really good into Grux. Other than that, they're unplayable. As far as some other solo laners like Iggy and Morigesh, I think they match up really well into the tanks. So like Sevarog, Richter, Steel, they match up really well into those characters. But outside of those, you will just lose matchups on those characters. They're very high risk, high reward. Things like Decker or Muriel solo, I think are just bad, to be honest. I just wouldn't play them. They would be like D tier is where I would put them, like unplayable, not a solo laner. Things like carries, I also would put down there. I think carries are also like maybe C tier, D tier, like just don't play them. I think they're bad. If you want to play solo lane, I highly suggest you learn how to play a real solo laner, like one of these guys, and you will, once you get the hang of it, at least once you play against that ranged matchup once or twice, then you will destroy them every time. So this is kind of going to be my tier list. I'm pretty happy with it. Hopefully you guys got some info on who you should play these characters into. If you guys really want to see an in-depth guide on every character, every solo lane character, and how to play their matchups, let me know. And I might be able to make something like that happen. Let me know if that's something that you guys want to see. But that's going to be it for the solo lane tier list today. So as always, guys, I've been Pinzo. This video's donezo. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.